Welcome to episode 5 of Emotional Fitness at Home. Today we're going to have a look at that unattractive word, gluttony. When I did the episode on greed, which was episode 2, a few people had asked me to differentiate between greed and gluttony. Aren't they the same thing? Now, there is a subtle difference. You could argue they are the same thing, but in the context of, say, the 7 deadly sins, but in everyday life, and I think I quoted that movie with Gordon Gekko in The Wolf of Wall Street, where he had a mantra which was, greed is good. Now, greed is more about collecting and hoarding more than is necessary, becoming, obsessed with, just buying and collecting and, hoarding. Hoarding's a good word. Now, gluttony's different. Gluttony's more about, the greed chakra, we spoke about it in association with the third eye. I want to talk about the gluttony in association with the solar plexus chakra. And that's all about sensitivity and courage and respectability, responsibility. Now, gluttony in the context is more about what we imbibe, what we take in. So greed is about what we collect from the outside world. Gluttony is more about what we ingest, what we overindulge in. It's about excess. And this is where those addicts out there, and I put my hand up there, I've been clean and sober since October the 12th, 1995, one day at a time. But has my gluttony left me because I'm not drinking and drugging anymore? No, it just, you may have heard that term that when people get into recovery, many of them swap the witch for the bitch. So an addiction is any behaviour that hijacks your self-respect, that you are enslaved to, that becomes more important than love. It overrides your whole life, and it's corrosive and it's accumulative, and it's something, the word addiction has Latin roots that mean enslavement, so it owns you. Now, when it comes to addictions, whenever I'm working with somebody who is wondering whether they have an addiction or they have an obsessive compulsive behaviour, what's the difference? Well, it's obsessive compulsive behaviours are things we do to emotionally medicate. They are things that we do that can get out of hand. And I use a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being somebody who's absolutely abstinent from any obsessive behaviour. They don't drink, they don't drug, they don't overeat, they don't gamble, they don't overspend. They are rare creatures. And then we've got 5 being the mid-range, where most, that's the healthy range you want to sit between 4 and 6. But 5 is a person that might, socially drink, might occasionally splurge, but they don't ever corrode the quality of their life with any particular behaviour. 5 to 7, we've got a lot of people use substances, drugs, alcohol, food to manage anxiety because they don't know how to self-support when they're anxious. And this is something that we learn in adolescence. When we have parents that know how to manage their own anxiety, they can pass on those skills to their child and just remind them to just breathe. And however, many parents intellectually talk about managing anxiety to their children, but they don't walk the walk. They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And their children watch them get overwhelmed and anxious, and watch them reach for wine, go shopping, start drama, start gossiping. They watch them, when they're flummoxed and overwhelmed in life, reach for an external stimulus, and they don't sit with their own anxiety. They don't breathe with their own anxiety. So very few, I'm a parent. My children are now 33 and 31, and have I been a perfect parent? Far from it. However, children watch what we do. That's where you get your credibility. And if a parent is hypocritical, children in adolescence are on the hunt for hypocrisy. They're looking for who they can respect and who they can trust, and who not just talks the talk but walks the walk. Now, I do have a son who's in recovery, and he's been clean and sober for nearly a decade. But had I not been clean and sober, I've been clean and sober for nearly 25 years. And, he was a muso in the music scene. Now, he crashed and burned. And had I not been able to model sobriety and a quality life without drugs and alcohol, I dare say I would have very little credibility with him, and I would have sounded like a hypocrite giving him advice but not living it. So when it comes to gluttony, it's this sensitivity component within all of us, and we all have the capacity to be gluttonous, to overindulge, and that often comes from in adolescence not being, as I said earlier, skilled in processing anxiety. So if we don't know how to sit with anxious feelings, and anxiety is a part of everybody's life. However, whether it morphs into immobilizing panic attacks, or whether it's something that we can breathe through and dissolve away, depends on what skill sets we've been given and how emotionally fit those around us are. If we have parents that get anxious about us being anxious, that just becomes a dog chasing its tail. So getting anxious about anxiety is not helpful, and emotionally medicating when we're anxious is where gluttonous behavior often commences in adolescence. Because in adolescence, you know, we practice being mini adults within the family, and we practice managing our hormones and our libido, and, you know, we earn money for ourselves often for the first time we get a job in our teenage years. And we either learn how to listen to what's right for us and respond with ability, or we go into feast or famine. Feast or famine, fight or flight is what we do when we're in survival mechanism. And when people get too anxious, they go into survival mechanisms, they go into fight or flight. So they shut down, or, you know, they fight it, they fight with other people, or they fight the feeling by trying to suppress it or control it or numb it off. Now, I started my drinking and drugging career in my adolescence, as many do, and gluttony is this energy center that sits, it's a beautiful yellow color, sits in the solar plexus. And it takes discipline, personal discipline, to not be gluttonous. I'll let you know when I've nailed it, but I'm definitely a work in progress. Now, discipline is different to punishment. When we're fearful, we punish ourselves. And I have many of my eating disorder clients that are binge eaters, that are carrying more weight than they're comfortable, they're comfort eaters, or my anorexic clients. They have issues around fight or flight. It's around the emotional drivers rather than the behaviour. The same, you know, with alcoholism and drug addiction. We know that around 70% of all drug and alcohol addicts have had some kind of trauma. If you haven't seen any of his work, this is him here. Gabor Mate, this is another beautiful book of his, but he's done some stuff on YouTube around addiction, and he is riveting. Also, Russell Brand has got a YouTube talk with him. Now, and he talks a lot about the ratio of people with emotional trauma and how that sits with addictions. Now, I've been working at the Royal Brisbane Hospital HADS unit, which stands for Hospital Alcohol Drug Service Unit. I've been there for about 20 years running groups. And I've seen people from all walks of life. I see the underbelly of Brisbane come in through those revolving doors. And some people I see once and they get into recovery, and some people come back multiple times trying to get the formula right to address their addictions. Now, the teenage self has the propensity to be the gluttonous self that says, oh, fuck it, I'll have what I want, you know. I notice clients that have parents that are food police, either a mother or a father, that, you know, I can't have a fat child, or, you know, that they have real issues around weight themselves, and they project that onto their children. And they project their fear onto their children. And so their children basically are marinated in that. And then sometimes when they reach adolescence, they do one of two things. They conform or rebel, because adolescence is very much a time where you have a look at the scripts and information you're giving, and then you're supposed to individuate. And in tribal cultures, in adolescence, the women go to the red tent, the girls go to the red tent with the women as soon as they start to menstruate, or there is usually a ritual. Once a girl starts to menstruate, sometimes it's 12, sometimes it's 15, Mother Nature's got the calls on that, but whenever that happens, in many tribal cultures there's a ritual, and the women, not one woman, the women help her through her rite of passage and help her with different skill sets and different stories, so she's got some understanding that there is no one size fits all, and it's important to listen to all the women in the tribe and work out who you most relate to. When I'm talking to girls or boys, you know, preschoolies, I talk to them about human beings being like dog breeds. We have all got assets and liabilities in our innate character. I often equate myself, I'm a big woman, I'm 5'10", you know, and I'm a German Shepherd kind of a woman. I've got a 50-kilo German Shepherd dog upstairs. I'm a big man, big dog woman. Now, there are women in my family of origin that are more like Chihuahuas or more like Greyhounds. They're smaller species. Now, in an ideal world, I would have had a village raising me. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to raise an adolescent. It takes a village to support an adult too, by the way. We don't ever stop needing that support. Now, in an ideal village, my German Shepherdness, I would have found an aunt or a cousin or somebody that was a similar breed to me, and they would help me learn how to hunt and a good breeding partners for myself, what was good for, you know, volume-wise to fill up a bigger body as opposed to a, you know, a smaller, petiter framed woman. And often, you know, when I hear some people giving work-life balance tips around diet, I had a heated debate with a woman on an interview once. It was International Women's Day, it's a few years back now, and you know, they were asking us for work-life balance tips, and this one woman, and she was a little Chihuahua woman, she was a tiny little petite woman, maybe a size 6, and she was talking about food and work-life balance, and I had to say to her, you know, look, I absolutely respect that would work for you, but for a woman of my size, you know, I spent my life trying to eat what smaller women were eating, and spent my life hungry and feeling wrong and trying to get my German Shepherd hips into size into a little small dog kennel. I just couldn't fit. Now, when we don't get the right support, we can get anxious about where we fit and what style of breed of woman or man we're going to be. Now, it doesn't mean, it's not about pigeonholing us, because, you know, when we go to a puppy park and there's lots of puppies there, they're all cute and they're all wonderful and none are better or worse, they're all playing around. But when you go to that puppy park years later and they're all adult dogs, there's a pecking order. And there are dogs with different temperaments that are better at more roles than others. Now, we use German Shepherds for police dogs. We use Swiss Shepherds for trauma dogs. We use Labs for seeing eye dogs. We use Greyhounds for running dogs, you know, Rottweilers, Doberman for guard dogs, St. Bernards for rescue dogs in the snow, cattle dogs to run around. And again, it's not that you couldn't for 1 minute. It's not pigeonholing, but it's just knowing your temperament and your skill set, because we're all born with gifts. Now, you could train, it could be argued that you could train a Labrador to be a police dog. However, the disposition of a lab is they're happy to just kind of sit down and be quiet. Whereas a German Shepherd needs more, you know, a German Shepherd trying to be a seeing eye dog, you know, they're task driven, they need a job to do, they're working dogs. So I think in adolescence, getting back to that tribal culture, we move from being puppies in the park where everybody's kind of cute into growing into ourselves. And our, you know, a woman, her belly, her bum, her hips, she fills out. The young male, he grows, his whiskers, his shoulders, you know, his body fills out, and they start to morph into the adult they're going to be. Now, tribes need diversity, so more often than not, if there's a cluster of females in a tribe, mothers, daughters and grandmothers, they won't all be the same, there'll be a mix. This is why often a cousin or an aunt will be very different from the mother or the sister. And for boys, the same thing. And then it's about tapping your potential in that skill set and honouring every other life choice that every other species of female or male makes. Now, if we don't get that emotional education in adolescence, we can often feel wrong, because we look at our German Shepherdness and then look at a Dachshund and think, they're happy doing A, B and C. I'd be miserable. Is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with them? They just don't understand. You know, we don't integrate the fact that we are supposed to be different, and in our diversity lies challenges and gifts. So without that education, we go into fight or flight. We're anxious because we can't relax into ourselves. And anxiety is a natural state when we're learning anything new. You know, when you're going to a foreign country. I remember when we got off the plane in Moscow for the first time. We'd never been to Russia. There was a bit of anxiety, different to having gone to Paris or somewhere else where you'd been before. It's a very, very different place to visit. There's an energy there. There was a bit of anxiety. Whenever I do a keynote, I've been doing keynotes for 20 years. But I am always anxious. I'm always in the loo doing a meditation and just surrendering to Mother Nature because, I want to do a good job and I never go from a script. So I need to be able to articulate, I need to be able to connect. And one of the biggest things I have to remind myself is my job is to be Cynthia. Divide the audience into thirds. A third of the people that hear me speak, I will just give them the shits. They will just tune out and think, who the fuck is this bird with her bloody sparkles and her twinkles and what the fuck has she got to say? She's annoying me. Now, there are some people that meet you that you are just going to annoy them and you won't even know why. It might be because you remind them of someone they don't like. You might be a star sign. You might be taller, shorter, whatever. They just are not going to like you. At face value, they might grow to later, but initially, you're just going to be a turn-off for them. Now, there's another third of the audience, and your life audience, that you're going to meet that are going to be ambivalent. They won't remember you. You won't have much impact. They can take or leave you. It wasn't a big deal. And then there's another third of the audience that you meet that are just going to love you. They just don't want you to change a thing. They just love you as you are. Now, I spent much of my adolescence focusing on that third that didn't like me, thinking I had to convert them. I had to fit into what they needed me to be. And, you hear in recovery rooms often, it's a very common theme with the anxious addict, that they can be in a room of 100 people and 99 can adore them, but one doesn't. And that one becomes their focal point. So, if you have anxiety in adolescence, and it's not quelled and you don't have an emotional education, your emotional literacy is compromised, this gluttonous behavior can result as a form of self-soothing. We talk about retail therapy. People talk about comfort eating. These are weapons of mass distraction that when you're feeling anxious, a lot of people divert their anxiety so they don't have to feel it. Now, anxiety is your friend. It's the alarm going off saying, you need to check in with yourself. You need to hold your own hand, catch your breath. You're a German Shepherd, not a cattle dog. It's more important for you to be authentic than popular. Breathe. When you're anxious, sitting with that feeling takes emotional muscle. Getting into denial is when we are at the mercy of, we're vulnerable to gluttonous behavior. So comfort eating, many people comfort eat to try and stifle their anxiety. I used to drink and drug. And what drugs and alcohol did for me, they were a solution for a long, long time. And many behaviors that end up being self-sabotaging started out as self-soothing. They started out as anxiety management weapons of mass distraction because nobody taught that adolescent to sit with their anxiety and learn how. It's like planking at a gym, sitting with a big feeling. You've got to build emotional muscle through repetition. And you get a lot of homework in adolescence on sitting with confronting, challenging new situations so that hopefully you've got some anxiety management skills. But if you keep deferring that emotional homework and don't do it, it's going to show up at midlife. Most people spend the second half of their life getting over the first. And there are many people that at midlife, we often call it a midlife crisis because you get to review the emotional homework you didn't do in adolescence. And Mother Nature normally pans it out that once you are hitting midlife, between 45 and 55, if you've had children, they're hitting adolescence. So it's a time you see yourself often reflected in your children, and it's time for you to review your homework. And you've probably heard that beautiful saying, we must become the parent we needed when we were younger. You must become that parent for your children, but also too to reassess your relationship with yourself. However, getting back to the self-soothing behaviours, drugs and alcohol, well, I started off with alcohol as a young girl. And what alcohol did for me, when it was a solution, what it did for me was, in a way, do what a loving parent could do. It would take the edge off of my anxiety. It would make me feel comfortably numb, confident, albeit chemical confidence. And it would, make me feel better. And it was reliable. Now, there's a use-by date to any weapon of any gluttonous behaviour, which is exactly how the addiction can grow. So I have clients that had, as I said, parents that were food police. So once they reach adolescence, You know, they want to do a fuck you to the parents, and they starve or they binge. You know, I have many clients that have eating disorders because they had an obese parent, or, you know, and so they are personal trainers, they're underweight, they're obsessed about exercise. And then I have clients that have, they carry more weight than they're comfortable with, and that's a fuck you to their parents that were stick thin and, you know, policing, you know, what they ate and, you know, fearful. I mean, I used to hear the phrase a lot, you're going to be the size of a house, from little petite women, because to them I was the size of a house, and I still am a fucking size of the house. I have to work on some of my emotional fitness homework is whenever I stand near a petite woman to not make myself smaller, to make her more comfortable, because I made many petite women in my tribe uncomfortable because I was so much bigger and I needed so much more fuel. And yeah, so gluttonous behavior, you know, in the 7 deadly sins, you know, it was very much around taking more than your fair share and not being empathetic towards those in need. And that's why it was a sin, you know, when, you know, and still, you know, when we are gluttonous, and I can find myself, you know, when I'm out of balance, when I'm hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, that's the HALT system that many recovery groups use, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. H also stands for hormonal for many women. But when I'm out of balance, I can resort to gluttonous behavior. Now the gluttonous behavior, remembering gluttonous means overindulgent. So that behaviors that can fall into this category, as I've mentioned, food, drugs and alcohol, retail therapy, shopping and gambling is gluttonous behavior. It's excessive, it's overindulgent. Undereating and overeating, feast or famine, is the same. Now, one might argue, how is not eating gluttonous? What you are actually doing is, you know, obsessing over an illusion, obsessing over a solution that is unhealthy for you. And by not eating and taking your body into famine, that is still a form of control, and it's an excessive behavior. So we've got the eating or not eating, we've got the spending, and also too, you know, the withholding. You know, when people get frightened or they get anxious, sometimes they withhold and they become unkind and miserly, and that's still excessive behavior. Let's move into infidelity. So sometimes people have affairs, married people have affairs, or they go and pay sex workers or watch excessive porn because they're having a big emotional feeling. And if you're in a long-term relationship, you're going to have to keep doing the upgrades. And the older you get, emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy becomes a more intricate dance, and it requires a lot more heartfelt communication. Now, men and women can get lazy, or they might say they're bored, but it's because they don't know how to engage at a deeper level. They haven't had any modeling in their family of origin of romance. Their parents were enemies. Their parents were disconnected. They haven't seen partnership work. So it's like the train tracks stop, and when their relationship needs to keep growing, and we call it falling in love for a reason. Don't you want to, when you fall in love, keep falling in love until you drop off your perch? That really cheesy American, you know, movie Notebook, you know, is one of, Notebook and Titanic are some of the biggest selling movies. Why? Because they're about a story, a love story that endured. Now, if you haven't seen that as a reality, you know, many of the women in my family of origin had given up on men, and, you know, were not impressed by men, angry at men, and I hadn't seen happily married women that really enjoyed men in my emotional ancestry. Now, if you haven't seen that, it's very hard to believe it can be true. And the longer you're with somebody, if you don't have the skill set to do that partnership, you know, it's the skill sets you need in your 20s differ from your 30s, from your 40s, from your 50s. Now, my husband's 62, I'm 58. The romantic dance for us at this age is very different to what it was for me in my 20s. It's more beautiful, but it takes more skill, it takes more empathy, it takes more sensitivity. And it takes emotional muscle, because the older you get, your heart needs to be engaged. By the time you reach, you know, your 40s, yeah, sex is great, but emotional intimacy and romance is a hell of a lot better. That with sex, well, I mean, my God, that's the whole meal. That's a 3-course meal. It's interesting, infidelity. So excessive porn and having an affairs are usually Again, they're in a way a gluttonous behavior of overindulging in something that's actually not good for you because you don't want to sit with the feeling. Obsessive compulsive exercising can be another one. We know people with excessive compulsive cleaning, and remember, gluttonous is overindulgence. So have a think about what happens for you when you get anxious. And if you think about the word gluttony and this solar plexus chakra, and it's represented by the color yellow, which is very, it's a very interesting designation of that color. And I love, when I'm working with clients that are learning to listen to their intuition, inner tuition, what their body, their heart, their thoughts feel and say and think. I always say that your anxiety sits here in the solar plexus. It's like the center light. The heart's the green light, the base chakra is the red light, and in the middle here of them both, you have this amber light, this beautiful yellow. Now, when you're driving along at night and perhaps it's raining and the lights are out and you're getting a yellow flickering light, that basically means slow down, check your bearings. You can't follow what the traffic around you're doing. You have to individuate and go with your own cues. Do some research, slow down and be cautious. Now, anxiety, when we are love-fueled, we call our anxiety butterflies. And when we are fear-fueled, we can call our anxiety panic. And it can escalate, that's for sure. Now, butterflies are a lovely thing. We feel, before we go on a great holiday or go on a great date or something that's really quite exciting. But nonetheless, it's fluttering because it's new and it's uncharted territory. And when that fluttering happens, I always say to clients, let's say you're going on a date and you've got the flutters and you're a bit anxious, put on a lovely song in the radio, put in some ear pods and just let somebody you love their voice sing and soothe to you. Hold your own hand, breathe. Anxiety is not the enemy, it's a part of the human scope. And if you don't pay attention to it, you're liable to do gluttonous behavior. And that can be self-sabotaging. So you might have one too many drinks before you go out. You might gorge on Tim Tams before you go out and spoil your appetite. You might internet spend and money that you didn't intend to spend just to do something to distract yourself from sitting with that feeling. So this solar plexus chakra is where our gut instinct is, and there is no time more important than when we're anxious to listen to our gut instinct, because that yellow light is flickering. And when it's flickering, it means tune in. Hold on, don't distract. If you go into fight or flight, you are vulnerable to gluttonous behavior because you're in survival. You feast or famine, you excessively drink. It's time to parent that teenager. It's time to show up and say to that teenager, yes, I'm anxious, breathe. My little yellow light's going off. What do I need? I need to calm myself. We need to become, what's that beautiful saying that Gandhi said? We must become the change we wish to see in the world. Anxiety is not the enemy. And so many people with issues around food, sex, drugs and alcohol, and they're the top 4 areas where gluttony plays out. They usually have an unparented teenager that's frightened and overwhelmed within them. And the great news is we can self-parent. And unless we self-parent, we are not an authentic role model for anyone in a younger generation, because they're watching what you do. And as I said, if you're just talking the talk but you're not walking the walk, they tune out. They don't listen. They might love you, but they don't listen. So it's important, if you're having issues around drugs, alcohol, sex or food. So let's take drugs and alcohol. You may not be a raging addict, but you may be emotionally medicating with booze. And if you are, I would suggest you give your liver a break. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. For some people that, sit between, remember I spoke about the 5 to the 7, people from a 5 to a 7 could do a 90-day reboot, which is 12 weeks, which is a season. and it gives your liver and your psyche a break to reset. People that sit between a 7 and a 9 that have been doing excessive emotional medicating with booze will find 90 days too hard. So I suggest to them to give themselves 72-hour windows, and when they do drink, give themselves a limit, perhaps a three glasses of wine, half a bottle of wine tops. Depending, and again, these are just, I'm generalizing here, depends on your body height and your, what's going on and how much you're drinking. But I would suggest a 72-hour window, and halve, if you're drinking a couple of bottles of wine, bring it back to half a bottle of wine every 72 hours. And do that 72-hour window for 90 days. And again, we're seasonal creatures. We are hardwired for seasons, and if we do something for 90 days, it gives us a chance to bed down that habit. With alcohol, cigarettes, we've done alcohol with nicotine and other drugs and pill popping drugs. If you're addicted to a heavy duty drug, and nicotine is certainly one of those, to look at harm reduction, or to go and have a look at, if you want to totally abstain, abstaining, there's so many different ways to quit. There's so many great apps to have a look at that. If infidelity and excessive pornography or paying for a sex worker is a weapon of mass distraction, it's a gluttonous behavior. It's you wanting all the cherries on the cake without doing the emotional homework. It's being self-indulgent. To reassess that behavior for 90 days, give yourself a reboot, a season to reboot, and make a deal with yourself that you are going to abstain from that behavior for 90 days. And if you do, in the first 30 days, you'll uncover the unattractive parts of your personality that need work. And we've all got them. In the second 30 days, so from day 0 to day 30, you're going to uncover the big emotions that you've been hiding from with this gluttonous behavior. From 30 to 60 days, you're going to discover new ways to redirect your anxiety and to self-soothe and self-parent. And then from day 60 to day 90, you'll start to recover, and you'll start to reboot your self-respect. And self-respect is the ultimate currency in life. It's the one thing you have to earn for yourself and nobody can take from you. Gluttonous behavior hijacks your self-respect, because it doesn't matter if you're hiding the Tim Tams. It doesn't matter if you're hiding the bottle of alcohol. It doesn't matter if you're sneaking ciggies. You know that you are bullshitting yourself and others, because anything you're doing in secret is shame-driven. And anything that's shame-driven is compromising your self-respect. And that is the ultimate currency. It's something you have to earn. You can't bullshit yourself. We can stay in denial for periods of time, but there is a use-by date to that. Now, whenever I'm doing workshops with psych students that want to study drug and alcohol, I always say to them, you've got to remember that drugs and alcohol keep many people alive for a long, long time. They start as a form of self-soothing and end up as a form of self-sabotage. But it's all gluttonous behavior, and it's all because there's an unparented, undisciplined adolescent. Now remember, there's a big difference between discipline and punishment. Discipline is about being kind, about being empathetic. It's great to be kind to everybody else, but if you're punishing to yourself with your dialogue and the disrespect you speak to yourself about yourself, you are going to need to do retail therapy and comfort eat, because you're going to be whipping yourself for not, being too much of this and not enough of that. So, where it starts is in, first of all, you can't change what you're not willing to see. And after you turn off, after we finish our little time here today, if you have a look at where your gluttonous behavior shows up. Now, it's a 7 deadly sin for a reason, because we are all prone to, at some stage in our life, in some chapter of our life, to be gluttonous, to be self-indulgent, to be excessive, because we're hiding. We're ashamed of what we feel or how we feel, or the fact that I should. Whenever you hear the words shame and should is always about who everybody expects you to be, and shame is, about disappointment within yourself. Guilt is when we believe, we've done something bad. Shame is when we actually believe we are bad. We're bad, flawed, broken people. So, Any behaviour that you're doing that you hide, when you're spending money and hiding it from your partner, when you're hiding food, when you're hiding pornography, when you're hiding an affair, when you're hiding cigarettes, when you are hiding any behaviour that you are ashamed of, you feed it. Because it keeps corroding your self-respect, and then what do you do to counterbalance that? You do more of it, or you find another weapon of mass distraction. So this gluttonous behaviour, again, sits here in this yellow chakra there, and again, to get on YouTube, and chakra meditations aren't for everybody, but they do align at the 7 chakras, the 7 deadly sins, the 7 stages of grief. These are all models that we're talking about in this Emotional Fitness at Home, because they're universal models that have been around for a long time, because we all can fall down, we can all fall down into these behaviours and regress. That's what we call the shadow self. I'm yet to meet a saint. Very few of us are saints. So the next topic in episode 6 will be lust. Now that's an interesting one. So we'll unpack that in the next video. But thank you for showing up here today. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. And please feel free to share the YouTube. I do daily word vitamins on my Facebook page, cynthiamorton.com. They're free. If you don't like social media, you're not on Facebook, you can certainly just subscribe to cynthiamorton.com. That's also free, and you'll get a daily word vitamin show up in your inbox every day. I also do some stuff on Instagram. I run some groups in Brisbane, and that's under hashtag Emotional Fitness Recovery. And then there's my play Instagram, where I just put up delicious things, gardens, and it's called Love, Joy and Delight, hashtag Love, Joy and Delight, where I just, things, that actually help me feed my heart with love, joy and delight. I just share them just for fun, just for play. Okay, that's enough from me. I hope from now until when we meet again that you look after your heart and you work on your emotional fitness. You are happy to work inwards as well as outwards, and give yourself the opportunity to be your best self. Thanks for spending time with me today. See you next time.